we have a California Fisheries and Seafood Institute update, and then also, which we're really grateful for, talking about the Sea Urchin Commission. And then, if you don't mind, and I'm calling an audible on this as well, we had heard earlier, particularly on bullgrass and urchin habitat on the North Coast, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that at the end of your words, and would love to get your take on that.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So thank you very much, Senator Mike McGuire and Tom Westlow, for convening this session. My name is Dave Rudie. I own a seafood company in San Diego, Catalina Offshore Products, with over 100 employees. We carry a full line of seafood, mostly California and Baja California. I'm currently the president of the California Fisheries and Seafood Institute, and also the California Pelagic Fisheries Association, a newly formed association for tuna and OPA fishermen. Anyway, I started my career as a fisherman. I was diving for seaweed and sea urchins at Catalina Island in the 1970s, and in the 1980s, out of necessity, I learned how to sell my own catch, a little bit like Pete's doing, but in a different direction. I started knocking on sushi bars and offered them the sea urchin. There weren't very many sushi bars at the time, but I found some markets in Japan, and I expanded the business. And anyway, in the 1980s and 90s, we primarily exported our sea urchins to Japan because there was still not a big market here. Sushi started becoming popular, and it became very popular in the last 15, 20 years. Anyway, in 1986, the sea urchin industry had concerns about sustainability, and we saw a lot of people jumping into the fishery, and it was actually a processor in Northern California, Dave Showalter, who approached Dan Hauser to pass a law in 1986, which created the Director's Sea Urchin Advisory Committee. I was appointed to that committee, and it was an opportunity for industry to get together, both fishermen and buyers, meet with the Department of Fish and Game, and just talk about the different issues. And we looked at everything from aquaculture. We thought maybe that would be a way to preserve the future. We read something that Japanese did about brush studies, that they were collecting their sea urchin, the brushes. We put brushes out in the ocean. And we got some settlement, but the interesting thing was the pattern of the settlement. And the Sea Urchin Commission has continued that work. We transformed from the Director's Sea Urchin Advisory Committee to the Sea Urchin Fishery Advisory to the Sea Urchin Commission, and we're still paying for that basic research. Anyway, that's just, I'll get back to Sea Urchin Commission later, but I've been involved in that a long time. Anyway, as you know, sushi became very popular around the turn of the century. We had a big El Nino in '98, and that's when I really diversified my company. Anyway, I just want to kind of make the point that the fishermen and the fishmongers have a lot of information, a wealth of information about our seafood supply. And CFSI is available, to help inform your decisions. I have a short presentation about CFSI. It started in 1954. Mostly fishmongers, but fishing association, fishermen are involved also, but it is more of a fishmongers association. Again, 1954, this organization was started originally in North and the South, and they merged together. The mission, if you looked at the mission, they were pretty visionary. In 1954, they said they advocate the conservation through the utilization of the maximum sustainable yields of all marine resources. So, the fishing industry is often attacked for not looking at sustainability, but we have an investment. We have an investment. The fishermen have their boats. We have our plants. We need sustainability, and we care about sustainability. So the CFSI members are the leaders of the fishmongers, of the people who handled the seafood, both the local seafood and the imported seafood. So I'm sure you all know, but seafood is very healthy for you. The omega-3s are incredibly healthy for your brain, your heart, your muscles, for development. So just want to bring that up one more time. Again, seafood benefits are pretty amazing, and the number of people in the world that rely on seafood as their primary protein is important too. In California, we consume about 22 pounds per person, which is over the average. That equates to 2,679 pounds of seafood per day consumed in California. Over 20 billion in sales per year, and approximately 145,000 jobs. And that's the whole chain. That's, you know, the fisherman, the fish processor, the restaurant down the line. So I just want to talk about, echo on something Pete talked about. The fishermen are getting older, and the fishermen are getting beat up by some of the environmental organizations, the regulatory process, and we need to have a way to continue to support our fishermen. Pete's idea of an apprenticeship program is great. We just need to support our local fishermen. It's just so important. Again, as we know, the issue with the Dungeness crab and the domoic acid, the fishermen are suffering. The fishmongers are suffering too. The fishmongers that normally buy that crab don't have that business. They have to still pay their rents, all their expenses. Maybe they can lay off some employees, but it's tough for everybody. And we really appreciate your efforts to try to get some sort of economic assistance for the industry.
About a minute.
So anyway, that's my presentation. I can talk a little more about the Sea Urchin Commission in depth. Again, I was involved in the Director's Sea Urchin Advisory Committee, and we found we were working under the department. We were kind of part of the government at that point, and we had to do our budgets a year in advance, and we had a lot of limitations on how we could spend the money. So actually, it was Pete that came up with the idea. Let's do something different. Let's get some legislation. Let's change it. Let's make it It was the Sea Urchin Fishery Advisory Committee, and then Pete did a little more research, and he came up with the idea of a commission. He looked at agriculture and said, well, if they can do it for tomatoes and avocados and almonds, why not do it for seafood? So we went, who'd you get to do that legislation, Pete?
It was D.D. Alpert, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So in 2004, the California Sea Urchin Commission started. And at that point, it was divers and processors. And actually, most of the processors dropped out after 5 years. There was a referendum, and they quit. But there's talk of maybe the processors going back in. Anyway, the commissions are very useful. It's not just about marketing. It's about regulatory issues. It's about fishery issues. There's a whole range of issues that come up in these meetings. And sometimes they're contentious, and sometimes people agree, and sometimes there's almost fights. But it gives an opportunity for the industry to get together on a formal basis. And then when we go to a regulatory agency such as the Department of Fish and Game, or no, excuse me, Department of Fish and Wildlife, at least we have more of a consensus. It still may not be 100% consensus, but we've winnowed out some of the ideas and got a little more closer. And there's always an opportunity for somebody to go before the commission and put their viewpoint in there too, but it's less erratic at the commission level when the decisions are made. So first, I also want to apologize last night for not having the uni shooters. So Tom Trumper, who normally does the uni shooters, he's out of Fort Bragg, and they have been devastated by the warm water blob. So what happened in Northern California, the warm water moved in. At first, everybody thought, this is great, the water's clear, the water's warm. But what happened is the Nereocystis died off. The kelp in Northern California is Nereocystis, and Southern California is Macrocystis. And the Macrocystis can tolerate the warm water, and the Nereocystis can't. It died off. Then the sea urchins didn't have any food, so they're very skinny, so it's not cost effective to dive or to process for them. And then we had the starfish die off. So the starfish die off, also at first everybody said, well, it's unusual, but what's it going to, it is not really affecting us. But what it may have done is it may have caused the successful recruitment of the purple urchins. So we have purple and red urchins. And the red urchins, which are more likely black, are the ones we harvest, and the purple urchins there's much less of a market for them because of the size. They're harder to process, take more time to dive for. There is a niche market for them. Pete has a good market for them, but it's not as big a market as the reds. So the recent reports we've got is that the purple urchins have recruited, and their predator may have been the starfish. So now there's these carpets of little purple urchins in shallow, and we don't know if they'll die off on their own accord or what, but that's another concern in the North Coast right now.
Absolutely.
So, and now we have an El Nino, which causes more problems, so.
No, thank you, and I'm just so grateful, and thank you for pitching there and being able to give both reports. We greatly appreciate it and love hearing about the history as well.